Awesome. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on the Great Resignation and the Great Retention, which is what I want to talk about more today than the Great Resignation. We have a great group of people joining us today. We can't believe, first of all, our panelists, amazing. I can't wait to talk to you guys. And then we also have about 380 people who registered for this webinar. So we're so thrilled for that. And you will get a copy of the slides as a result of registering, and we'll send you the replay of the webinar in case you missed it. So don't feel like you have to take copious notes. So I have put a link to everybody's LinkedIn profiles, and also David has a really strong Twitter following, and you should absolutely follow him there. Please link in with all of us. Phil, can you give me a heads up that you, just a thumbs up, you can see my screen? Okay, so I have a few slides and then we're going to get into this very awesome, meaty discussion. So I'm so excited for all these people today to be here. I just want to make sure you guys follow us on LinkedIn because we post every single day. I'll put the link to our LinkedIn in the chat. And we're obviously talking about this. When you Google the Great Resignation, there are so many great memes that come up and articles, including, I love this one, the top left, the Great Resignation is quickly becoming the Great Revolt. How to manage the Great Resignation? Who is driving this? How employers drove workers to quit. I mean, the articles are, you do a search and you'll find tons of things there. This one I thought is something we all need to think about, because many of my friends who work at law firms, they're not just lawyers, they're in professional roles. They're all waiting to collect their bonuses. So, some firms think, oh, well, we'll pay bonuses in January or February. Well, guess what? Your people will leave in January or February, even if you do that. I always waited till the end of the year and started my new job in January. I will tell you that if you think things are bad now in terms of your people leaving, just wait until Q1, Q2. And I don't mean to be negative Nancy, but there are a lot of people who are just waiting until they can collect their bonuses. So this is a good article. I'll put the link to this. I mean, it's not specific to the legal industry, but I think it's well worth a read. And I want to just mention, for any of you who live in the suburbs, the Great Resignation is not just for professional services. We know it's hitting the supply chain, but just so you guys know, the snowplows are not going to be in full force this year. So I would book your snowplows early on. There's also, you guys heard, a cream cheese shortage in the US. It sounds trite, but these are things that are making it difficult in general, because workers are still saying, you know what, screw it. I don't want to go back to the work job I had. I'm going to do something different. Or I'm going to, figure out my life, whatever it may be. So I saw this quote and I wanted to just bring it up. It's from one of the articles, I forget which one, but workers aren't just looking for higher pay, more time off, or more days at home. They're questioning the whole meaning of the daily grind, which is what we're going to talk about today. And the legal industry has been forced to innovate. Like forced innovation. It's a very flat model, and it's been very much, the same old. Maybe some firms, same old since 1870. The many law firms of every single size have been forced to innovate. And I think some firms have been kicking and screaming doing it. Other firms now can see the benefits of doing so, but it's been hard. And, workers really want to be valued in a way that they weren't necessarily before. It's not just about how much money you make. It's not just about benefits. It's about being valued and meaning from your work. And then, so the Great Resignation term comes from Anthony Klotz, and he is a psychologist. And he said, one hopefully silver lining of this pandemic would be that the world of work has transitioned to a more healthy, sustainable place for employee well-being. And I want to talk about this and find out from each of your very unique perspectives if you feel this is the case and what you feel law firms and the legal industry needs to do. Okay, so I wrote a social media post. It was a LinkedIn and a Twitter post about a law firm that came to me and asked if they could remove their associate bios from the website because they were worried about being poached, and it went viral. And I wound up getting quoted, and Laura wound up getting quoted as a result as well in several news outlets, because people were, I think, astounded that this is considered a form of retention. This is a fear-based retention strategy. There was also a firm, someone reached out to me at a firm where their firm was asking associates to either have the firm manage their LinkedIn account or delete their LinkedIn account altogether, which I found shocking. I worked at a firm many years ago that did not want us to go to any professional association events or belong to a professional association or have a LinkedIn account because they were afraid we would be poached away. That is not strategic retention. We're going to talk about this. And I think it's really interesting that some firms are panicking about this and then deciding to do this. And I think it's a panic-based reaction. So here are our panelists for today. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us just a little bit about their career path, as you know, in a few minutes. So Michael, so we've got two Allens on this. So it's like, okay, my M comes before R. So Michael, I'd like to start with you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm Michael Allen. Started Lateral, say 15 years ago after graduating from Harvard Law School, and initially working at Gibson Dunn and then moving to IRO in Manila, kind of learned the recruiting process at that time. At that time, I took a random cold call from a headhunter and said, here's my paper, and I'll look at two firms, Latham and IRO. It was very seamless. And it's kind of reminds me of what the time is today. When starting the business, firms had a demand for talent and there wasn't enough to go around. And it feels very frothy like it is today. But, fast forward from then, not to take too much time up, we have Lateral Links, our law firm division, from partner to associates, and in-house is Cadence Counsel for us. Our work is exclusive legal recruiting staffing firm for Fortune 100 companies to hedge funds and others. Then we have a doc review business called Bridgeline Solutions, and our clients are Deloitte, large e-discovery businesses, and directly with law firms.
Awesome, thank you. From your perspective today, it's going to be very interesting because I know this is probably the market in which there's so many moving pieces for you guys, and the booming, it's a revolving door right now of jobs for every level, particularly if you're a corporate associate, year 4 through 7, you are very coveted right now. Okay, so Ralph, you're next. Tell us about you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Allen. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Stroock and Levan. I sit in our New York office, but we have offices, as many of you know, in DC, Miami, and Los Angeles. I have been in and around law firms since 1984. I've been at the sort of C-suite level since about 2000. And I tried 3 times to get out of law firms in my career and came back. So I just kind of relented and said, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I've tried to really do my best and contribute wherever I go. And I'm really glad to be here and be part of this panel.
That's great, thank you. And you moved cross country from Allen Mackins in California.
I did, yeah. And I moved cross country to go to Allen Mackins. So I've crossed the country to be in this industry. So I'm in.
That's great. Well, we're so happy. I'm excited to hear from your perspective as the COO of a major firm and with all your experience. So Amber, please tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Carter. I am currently the Pathway and Recruitment Innovations Manager at Diversity Lab. I was previously in a diversity and inclusion role at a big law firm, and then moved to another big law firm and was doing attorney recruitment there before joining Diversity Lab. And so I really currently focus on all of our recruiting and pathway initiatives and work with a lot of law firms and legal departments. And so I look forward to being here today and talking to you all about recruitment and retention strategies.
Thank you so much. So Laura has some great slides to present all about the problems that law firms have now and for many, many years, systemic issues with regard to retention and recruiting of diverse associates, diverse candidates, women, why women don't make partner. We did a webinar earlier this year on with the very long path for women to make partner if that is what they choose and why it's so hard. And we did another panel on diversity and what firms need to do to make systemic changes. And I'll put a link to those programs in case you guys want to watch those. So Amber, very excited to have you. Diversity Lab is an incredible organization doing great work in the legal industry to ensure that there is equal representation and pathways for, like you said, leadership and all of those things. Okay, so we're going to skip over Laura Herzog because she got called away to an urgent meeting with her CEO. She was just promoted to the chief legal officer, but she will be with us hopefully soon. David Latt, I don't know that I even need to introduce you because everybody knows you, but David, tell us about you, please.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. My name is David Latt, and I'm a legal journalist. I currently write a newsletter/blog on the Substack platform called Original Jurisdiction. Before that, I founded Above the Law, the widely read legal news website, and oversaw it as managing editor from 2006 until 2017. Before Above the Law, I practiced law. I was a law clerk on the Ninth Circuit. I worked at Wachtell Lipton in New York, and I was a federal prosecutor in Newark, New Jersey. And I'm really glad to be here. Oh, and I forgot, after Above the Law and before launching Original Jurisdiction, I also took a little detour from journalism and worked as a legal recruiter with Mike Allen, who you heard from earlier. And I very much enjoyed my time at Lateral. It's a great recruiting firm. But like many people during this sort of great resignation, I realized I wanted to return to writing. I feel like if there's a place to be a recruiter, Lateral Link is the place. But for me, I wanted to return to journalism. And so here I am.
That's awesome. And guys, first of all, that's a great glowing review of Lateral Link. So Michael, you may want to get him to write a Glassdoor review for you because Glassdoor is a huge part of recruiting strategy right now for law firms, where it should be. So that's awesome. And David, I lived in fear of you when I worked at law firms, when Above the Law chat was the place where news would break. And so I'm so glad also to see how Above the Law has grown and everything you did at its helm. So congratulations. And David also had a very bad case of COVID, and many of you may know that he's been on the news about that. And you told us you were in the hospital, David, for three weeks, you said, on ventilator,
Yep.
right?
Yep,
Yeah,
that's right.
So follow David also on Twitter. We're so happy you're here. So, okay, so Laura, you're next. Tell us about you.
Well, hello, everyone. I am a founder and the CEO of Leopard Solutions, and we are a legal intelligence platform watching over 4,000 law firms as they ride this incredible great resignation wave. There's lots of things happening in the industry, and we put ourselves right in the middle of it so we can report on it to our clients and to the world. And I'm so glad to be doing this webinar today with this incredible panel, and I can't wait to hear what they have to say about our data.
I can't wait either. So Laura is going to present the data, and then I'm going to ask you guys your thoughts on it and then get into all these other questions. And also let me mention, if you guys have a question for the audience, for the speakers, put it in the Q&A or the chat and we'll try to get to it. And if we don't, I'm planning on writing an article afterward with insights from this presentation. So we'll get to it there. Thanks, Laura. So so there's me. So I'm Stephanie Marone. I have, like Ralph, have tried to get away from law firms, but I can't. So I've been doing this for 20 years. And I was in-house as a marketing person at Paul Weiss, Sullivan & Cromwell, a firm, McKee Nelson, that was unfortunately didn't make it through the financial crisis and became part of Bingham & McCutcheon, which didn't quite make it and wound up being part of Morgan Lewis. I was at MoFo, and I was also at Mayer Brown and then Proskauer, and then I was a consultant working with Eric Kress and Wendy Granero, who's my mentor, and I worked at a mid-sized firm as well. So lots of experience in law firms. Right now, so I lost my job and I started consulting, and it was just supposed to be something in the interim. And I kept getting calls to go back to law firms. I actually took a job for 2 weeks at a law firm and realized it wasn't quite the right place for me. And I started a consulting practice. And so now I work with law firms of all sizes and legal service providers. I work with Leopard on marketing strategy, content, and LinkedIn. And I love it, despite the fact that I keep getting phone calls to go back in-house at law firms. I'm trying not to. So it's great. And this was an accidental kind of career for me, which I think a lot of people sort of fell into it. I thought I'd be a lawyer and I wound up in marketing. So please do link in with all of us as well. And so, we're not done. We also have David. David is a return guest to the Leopard community of webinars because he did a great job on one of our earlier webinars this year. So David, tell us about you.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. My name is David Rose. I'm a litigation partner at Pryor Cashman and a member of the firm's executive committee. I got to Pryor Cashman in 1997 as a third-year associate, so I've been here for 24 years. When I got here, we were, I think, 87 lawyers. Now we're 180 lawyers, and I've lived through a number of cycles where the death of the mid-sized firm has been prognosticated never to materialize, certainly in our case. But very much looking forward to talking about the subject today and how mid-sized firms are really positioned well to take advantage of some of the things that Stephanie mentioned earlier in terms of what we expect to see being a flight out of some of the other law firms that we compete with.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you, David. So I, having been the CMO of a mid-sized firm, I very much am, very acutely aware of the benefits that mid-sized and small boutique firms have to recruit talent and to keep their people and all of the things there. I'm working with a number of firms, big and small, on recruiting marketing strategy, which is, by the way, something if you're not thinking about, you need to start thinking about, because it's not enough to have a great name on the door. Your people are getting poached and being tempted every day. So you've got to just, be a great place to work and have a strategy in place for recruiting marketing and retention marketing as well. So I'm so excited to get your perspective on the mid-sized firms too. So David works at Pryor Cashman, which is an awesome firm. All right, so that's what I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Laura is going to present some slides for us on the crazy market that's gone sort of bananas this year. So, and then I'll get your reactions to that. So Laura.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first slides that I'm going to show are over the entire universe that we look at law firms. And right now that's 4,220 firms. And this particular graph is comparing 2020 to 2021, and the bars represent the difference in 2021 from the prior year. So you can tell within that first quarter that entry-level hiring went way up. They'd sort of held off through 2020 on that entry-level hiring, but the first quarter of 2021, there was a real jump in entry-level hiring right out of law school. Quarter two, quarter three saw the lateral market really take off. So they were just getting started in quarter two, and then in quarter three, really resounding differences, right? I mean, there was legal recruiting that went on in 2020, but it really put the pedal to the metal in 2021. I mean, 177% increase over the previous year in associate recruitment in quarter three. That's pretty incredible. And we also saw, I don't have a chart for it here, but we're going to go into more detail in January about the number of job openings. It's absolutely staggering, the number of job openings that we're looking at. I mean, in the summer, June, July, we always had about 6,000 to 7,000, legal openings in the database. And now we're at what, 13,000? So these numbers really show that there's so much activity. Of course, quarter four, all the numbers are not in yet. So we'll have those numbers in January when we look back at the year in total. So if we look, now I'm just going to focus on sort of the top 200 firms. It's easier to do because we're also folding in new firms throughout the year in our overall universe. So if we just sort of bucket the top 200 firms, you can see what hiring has been like so far. A couple months ago, we estimated that we're going to hit about 13,000 lateral hires by the end of the year. I really think we're going to hit that number without sweating too much. That's a lot of hiring to go on in 1 year. I mean, 2019, if you look at 2017, 18, 19, there's always been a little increase year over year. 2020, of course, everything went way down, but there was still recruiting going on. But they're really trying to make up for lost time now, as these numbers tell us. As for entry-level hires, yep, the number is up. We're probably going to reach 7,900, maybe 8,000 by the end of the year. There's usually a big uptick in this fourth quarter, and that number is high, but I'm not sure it's really going to replace all those hires that got lost in 2020, but the number is definitely higher, and they're trying to make up for that lost time. Now, in September of 2020, we put diversity information in our database. This was after the George Floyd summer, and we decided, if not now, when are we ever going to do it? So we just put everything to the side, and we said, okay, we are going to put information in the database so that people that are looking to hire diverse attorneys can find them, and then we can report on that. In our database, we look at it as a probability, people that have a high probability of being ethnically diverse, people that have a high probability of being gender diverse, and that's how we deal with it in our data. Users that can see this data have either signed onto the Mansfield Rule with our friends at Diversity Lab, or they have signed the Leopard Diversity Pledge, which means they're going to use this data in order to find ethnically diverse candidates in order to hire them. But the great thing, the byproduct of that, is that we get to report on this as well. And what we saw by looking at these numbers a while ago was, yes, it's very exciting that the number of ethnically diverse hires has gone up, but so has the number of hires overall, right? And what we're looking for is the difference in those hires. We're looking in that, what that gap is. So in 2019 and in 2020, the gap in lateral hires between diverse candidates and non-diverse candidates was pretty big. It was 60%. Well, this year it dropped 11%. So this year that gap was only 49%. So that's really a win in that column. And that's the gap that we have to look at. Unfortunately, this looks to seem to be on the right path, but there is going to be a number that's going to be very interesting. And that's that gap between those entry-level hires. So the blue and the orange are the lateral hires, the gray and the yellow are entry-level hires. That gap is as wide as ever. So in 2019 and 2020, there was about a 61% gap. This year there was 61% difference. That gap is far too wide. And this, we believe, is the primary reason that the overall ethnically diverse population in law firms is not growing. We did a diversity webinar just a few months ago where we showed the needle really hadn't budged. In 2020, that number was 17%. In 2021, it was still 17%. So in order to really make that number grow overall, the entry-level hiring really has to, at least attempt to get close to the gains made by that lateral recruitment. Just swapping attorneys is not going to increase the pool of ethnically diverse attorneys. Bringing them into the pool in the first place with entry-level hiring is what we believe is really going to make a difference. We also decided to look at exits because exits also tell a very interesting story. So looking at all of the people that we believe have a high probability of being ethnically diverse after they left a top 200 firm, like the pool here is, close to 5,000 attorneys, right? So 1,683 moved from one top 200 firm to another top 200 firm. So that's good. 927 went into in-house, went to work for a corporation. 714 went to a different law firm, one that's not in the top 200. So far, about 1,300 have not yet landed on our radar, but that means they have not gone into a top 200 firm. They have not gone into the 4,200 firms that we monitor, and they have not gone into one of the 7,000 companies that we monitor. So that 1,300 number still has a question mark. Some of them we hope will come back on the board. But look at this graph closely, right? 34% rejoined another top 200 firm. That's good. 14% went to another law firm. 18% went into in-house. 26% have not rejoined something that we cover. Now we're going to look at what happened to gender diverse exits. This is a really scary graph. 34% of them have not rejoined a law firm, have not rejoined a company, have not landed anywhere that we monitor. Now, it's possible they went somewhere. It's possible, they opened up a sole proprietor, a law firm. That's something that we don't cover. But 2,849 women have not come back on the board. And that is, to us, sort of a disturbing number. Only 31% went to a law firm outside the top 200. Only 11% went to another top 200 firm. So when they exited the top 200, only 11% went to another top 200 firm. So we know now that we don't have a lot of, at-home schooling going on. When we saw this in 2020, we were like, well, these are the people that are responsible for keeping the household going, and there's so much going on. It's not surprising. But the fact that this number remains high is a little concerning. So those are numbers that we're going to be paying attention to. Now we're going to look at the hiring patterns just like we did for those that are ethnically diverse. So this is a really interesting graph. If you look at that gray and yellow graph in 2019, those entry-level hires were just even Steven, men and women, even Steven. In 2020, the female hires pulled ahead. There were about 10% more women hired at a law school than men. And 2021, that number went up again. So now there's about a 15% gap of more women being hired out of law school than men. So, we know we read the news, we see this stuff. There's more women on college campuses today than there are men. I haven't heard that same claim from law schools, but this is a pretty interesting statistic, and it might, have that same reality, that there were more women in law school than men. But this is what the hiring patterns show us. There's still a gap between men and women in lateral recruitment, but the gap is not nearly as wide as it is for those ethnic diversity hires. It's very small, so it's gotten so much better through the years. But the really interesting point to take away, I think, from this graph is those entry-level hiring patterns and how men are sort of falling behind women getting hired out of law school. This is also another very scary graph. So what we did here was look at the time it takes for people to make partner, both from a lateral perspective and from somebody who's a homegrown attorney, as somebody who entered, right after law school. Those are those entry-level hires. Year after year after year after year after year, the time has increased over and over and over. So, the entry levels have a much higher bar, of course, year over year. Their time to partner has increased 136% since 2012. That is a remarkable statistic. I mean, looking at this graph as somebody who entered a firm from law school, spend a couple of years at your first law firm and then move to a different law firm, you're gonna make partner in a shorter amount of time. This is a graph some people might look at and really question, staying at a firm long term, especially if they don't see that road to partnership easier at their home firm. This is also why we've seen in the news recently, top 200 firms announcing that they're changing their partnership model. They're making it a bit easier for people to become partner. The young people today, and hate to sound like such an old fogey, but they don't have that same quest to become partner that a generation before did. And if you look at this graph, it can really help explain why it's sort of lost its luster. And for many folks, it may seem unattainable. While the time to make partner has also grown for lateral hires, it has not grown nearly to the same extent, but there's also a high bar there. So this is a graph. After they've made these changes to entering partnership, well, we should have a very interesting graph next year, and we can see if those changes made a difference and they were actually, being made partner a little bit more quickly. So the last one I'm going to show is this is a happy chart. I've shown you some bad ones. I'm going to show you a happy chart. This is looking at what has happened in our growth decline report over time. So back in 2020, at the end of the year, we looked, and firms with zero growth, 0 to negative, and that's 0, -1%, 2, 3, 4, 5, -28%. There were 137 firms that saw 0 growth or negative growth in 2020. Now we can report there's only 87 firms in that position. That's great. In 2020, there were just 48 firms that had a little bit of growth, from 1 to 5% growth. This year, there's 63. 6 to 9% growth. There's 30 firms in that bracket in 2021. There was only 12 last year. So the firms are doing much, much better. And they're growing. They're making up some of that lost time back in 2020. We'll see how this ends up at the end of the year, but this is a really positive chart. So the data is showing a lot of positives, is showing some negatives, and it's showing some areas where there might be some trouble. And that's what the data says today. We'll see what it has to say, at the close of Q4. There'll be some change in these metrics, and we'll come back in January and let you know what the final tally is.
Sorry, I was muted. Oh my God, wow. Okay, so I gotta get everyone's point of view here. And I'm also seeing some amazing comments in the chat, including we have the Dean of Career Services at Brooklyn Law, Karen Eisen. Thank you for joining us. And Karen says that she can confirm that there are more women than men in law school, and this trend has been increasing steadily over the past few years. We have a systemic problem, like I said. So let's delve into this. I'm going to start with David, because David's nodding furiously. David, tell us, what do you think of this data? Does it fit in with what you believe, what's going on in the market? And where do you think firms can go from here? David Latt, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I was pausing, actually.
Okay, sorry.
The data is absolutely consistent with what I'm seeing in the market as somebody who watches the industry. It's really just insane. We were talking before the call. Stephanie was talking about how firms are trying to hide their associates from their websites because there are so many people who are looking for that kind of talent. I've been looking at the market or following the market since the early 2000s, and I think this boom is the most intense and hottest one that I've seen. I think it's certainly hotter than the one that we saw emerging from the Great Recession, which in many ways was sort of a slow build or ramp up. The other thing I'll just observe is one thing that's interesting is this is taking place against a backdrop of these trends being mirrored in the labor market generally. I feel that sometimes the world of large law firms isn't necessarily consistent with the rest of the labor market, but here you're seeing these same types of things, labor shortages and compensation increases in everything from law firm associates and partners to truck drivers to restaurant and hotel workers. So that's interesting. It's not just in the legal profession.
Yeah, and again, remember snowplows, book your snowplow now. I agree. It's, we're seeing the effects of our industry aren't unique. I think maybe it's interesting, like the demand for legal services and like sort of the pent up demand, and what happened last year was stagnant. There wasn't a lot of growth as we saw, and people were staying put, as we know from Leopard's data. David Rose and Ralph, from your vantage points, does the data, being our law firm folks here who work at firms now, like does the data fit with what you're seeing as well? So David Rose, let's go to you first.
Yes, to an extent, although we are seeing a large number of women, come to us laterally, but also as new hires. I mean, that's definitely a trend and a welcome one for sure. I will say this, we have a very low attrition rate as it relates to lawyers generally. When people do leave, they're not leaving our firm to go to another firm unless they're relocating. We do have some people who will go in-house or make those types of changes, but I certainly would agree with the fact, and as the data shows, that female hires and women hires, we're seeing a lot of it, and like I said, it's very welcome. With regard to the diverse candidates that we're seeing those too, being intentional about it, striving to have better numbers than have historically been seen across the industry and at our firm. And I think we're making progress there as well.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm seeing we have the Dean of Rutgers Law. Hi, welcome. So glad you joined us. She says she's also seeing the same pattern of the fact that there's a lot of women, and Laura pointed this out, which I think is a good point to make. A lot of women are being promoted to counsel. And that's sort of like, well, we're not going to promote you to partner. We're going to park you right here in the counsel position. We don't want to lose you. And I don't know if you guys saw that. I think it's Sidley. There's a number of firms now offering like managing associate positions. They're trying to change that flat structure of, associate counsel partner by offering something that's a little more multidimensional. We saw that Kirkland has changed its path to equity partnership, shortening it from 10 years to 9 years in the hopes of also retaining and attracting associates. I think we're going to see some very other creative things from other firms. There was another firm yesterday I saw that's offering mini MBA courses at some of the largest schools, and that's available to all the associates, from I think year 3 through year 8 or 9. So Ralph, let me ask you your take on this, and then Amber, we brought up the women and the diversity issue. I definitely want to talk to you about your perspective on why aren't women, we've got tons of women, but then they don't make partner or they leave, or we know Loris just said we've got women unaccounted for who are just like, I'm out. So Ralph, what do you think about the data and anything? You can talk to us about anything you want, actually.
No, you don't want me to do that. I feel like the data's consistent with what I've seen. I think there's sort of a sad element to the data that, in terms of inside the numbers, I don't think you're going to see as much of an increase in people of color or Black people in the lawyer ranks for another 10, 15 years, because you got to remember, when George Floyd was murdered, there was a real feeling that people should hire more Black people. There should be more Black people in law schools. Well, that just doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
A lot of Black people don't grow up in families with 3, 4 generations of lawyers, or in their family, or even 1 or 2 generations. So that's got to be something that's got to happen over the next 10, 15 years. So I think you'll see other ethnically diverse numbers grow, but it's going to take longer to see that, with Black people. I think also that the data, the hiring numbers, I think somebody asked a question about comparing 2021 to 2019. And, when I looked at your 2020 and your 2021 data, if you average them out, it's about what 2019 and the years were before. So there's sort of a wave going on here, right? And I think a lot of the demand that we're seeing, that law firms are seeing, is pent up demand from deals that didn't happen in the last year, or litigations that have been tabled, courts were closed, right? And so there's a lot of pent up. So there's going to be a point, maybe 2023, where we're back to maybe whatever our true demand levels are. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to see where we are. But all of this, to me, just says that firms that know who they are, that have invested in leadership, and people who are leaders in the firm, who can communicate, who can articulate a leadership vision, I think those firms do better. I think, it's certainly money is important, right? We're not gonna lie about that. But I think people want to be a place where they feel like there's something going on there that they can feel a kinship to, that they will get on board with, and they want to be there for that. And so, I applaud David Rose. They don't lose people. That means they got a vision. That means they got a good leadership team, and they treat their people well. So I think it just comes back to leadership. And unfortunately, I think a lot of law firms in our industry think that leadership is a part-time job, and it's not. It's a full-time job. It's something that you practice just like being a lawyer. You can be a lousy leader or you can be a good leader, but it takes practice, it takes commitment. So I applaud those firms that are investing in leadership.
And I'm to that point, like I'm seeing a lot of firms all of a sudden come up with director of coaching, director of well-being. Well, where were you guys when we really needed that help a few years ago? And, coming at this from a professional staff person, we hate the word staff. There's articles in the American Lawyer about how law firms are losing their finance, marketing, HR professionals, recruiting professionals. There was a question about that. They're losing them in droves as well because they've never treated them at the same level as they have treated lawyers. So I wrote another post that went viral recently where I said that I worked at a firm that offered different maternity leave to staff than lawyers. And guess what? We remember that. We want to go where we're appreciated. We want to go where we have the same benefits. So firms need to realize that it's this archaic case structure doesn't work anymore. Treat, paralegals, by the way, we track that with Leopard. They're leaving in droves too. You can't live without your paralegals. If you are not,
can I just add, I would just say it really quickly. I think David Latt said this. We do have to look at this great resignation a little bit through the lens of COVID. We all have lived through, especially David, but others that you all love and care about, have been through hell in the last 24 months. And sometimes if the only change you can get is changing your job to maybe make yourself feel better that it's a different thing, I think there's a lot of that, that's going on too. Just being in front of a different Zoom screen for a different firm might give you the change that you want. You're meeting new people, you're something different. And so I think if that's the only change that people can kind of get in this environment that we're living in, I think that's driving some of it.
Yeah, I think also, Ralph, I think that's driving a lot of people moving, cross country, people moving from New York to Florida or wherever it is, people working remotely, saying I want something different in my life. So there's definitely the whole migration pattern away from big cities has also changed and opened up a whole other world actually for, I think, regional firms, mid-sized firms, boutique firms that wouldn't have been able to get a New York very high caliber person to move to, Charlotte or somewhere like Charleston and Austin. Now, they're saying in Nashville and Austin, the infrastructure for the cities isn't able to keep up with the demand because there's so many people who've moved there now. So it's a whole different kind of ball game. So Amber, sorry, David, go ahead.
Oh, the only thing I'll add real quick, and this picks up on things that both Ralph and you said, Stephanie. There's a concept that I think is universalizing that doesn't get spoken about much in the context of these discussions, and that's fulfillment, right? What's being left out of the discussion when it comes to money or when it comes to individualistic factors that people bring to their decision as to whether to stay or go at a law firm. If law firms are a little bit more intentional about professional fulfillment, professional development, I think that's really going to go a long way in retention. As much as I don't like that word because I think it has a fear-based connotation to it, right? Fulfillment, development, those things are forward-looking. If firms focus on that, I think you can see perhaps as we come out of COVID, if we do, the sea change in appreciation for people's roles and people's professional development and their satisfaction.
Yeah, it's 100% true. I think that's where they're going. And again, money isn't the only indicator or factor of why you're staying at a firm or why you're moving firms anymore. It's a lot. Do I feel valued? Do I like working here? Do I like my colleagues? Do you give me the opportunity to succeed? Leadership roles. I've seen firms now offer some up and coming partners the ability to be on a committee, the ability to run a group, the ability to go start an office. It's not just about pay, it's about other things that make you feel as part of the cohesive group and valued. So Amber, from your vantage point,
on that point, these are all great points, and looking at the data, and when you're looking at that entry level, when you're looking at women that are being recruited, it's about equal or now higher than men. But as you go through associate ranks, what happens to women, right? Those numbers start to drop off, and so as we're talking about these retention strategies, and especially right now with COVID, I think we all know that women have been exiting the workforce higher rates than men. And it's due to so much falls on women. I mean, we already had so much on our plate, and then you add a pandemic and having to homeschool or whatever it might be with your family. People are tired. People are tired. And so when you think about retention strategies, we talk about these flexible work arrangements and making your firm stand out and everything. And so, I think firms will really have to be very considerate when you start talking about these, flexible or remote work situations, because they can systematically still disadvantage women and people of color. For example, if some people are going into the office and others, are taking advantage of that flexible work arrangement, and only the people in the office get called into this in-person meeting and the other people on the team are left out that happen to be working from home, that's a disadvantage. They're not getting that face time. And so as firms adapt and make these different changes, we need to still be very cognizant of how it can still disadvantage people.
Yeah. Michael, from your point of view, seeing this, unprecedented recruiting market, what are your thoughts on, the data, the world? Is this sustainable long-term? What are you telling candidates that come to you and firms who need talent yesterday?
Sorry about that. On the Zoom calls, sometimes you don't control the who comes in. But so here's my perspective. I don't think a lot has changed. I think the circumstances have. And we've already had these, and I'll kind of get into what I see happening. But with COVID, you kind of threw, fuel on the fire. So it wasn't like in 2009 when you had a complete economic downturn. Here, it's a bit different. We just came to a standstill. So like Ralph, True Allen here said, you still had litigation needs. You still had hours that needed to be billed. You still had transactions. Firms didn't have the associates, and maybe the partners were there to fulfill those hours. And so with that pent up demand, firms had to respond. And so how firms responded is they came out with new ways to staff hours. So, AmLaw, 10 firms would start hiring regional associates that they weren't doing before in cities that Laura tracks, but other firms don't operate in. And they would hire them remotely. We had a tremendous uptick in Canadians, where traditionally we had firms that would hire them and look at them, but then firms would see that, and for Canadians, this is a pay increase. And so there wasn't a lack of hours to service, there was a lack of talent to fulfill those hours. Laura, one area you may want to look into for your data, what I was thinking is, we have a tremendous amount of people that are, we call them secundees. There's a big outfit out there called Axiom. Some people call them, high-end hourly workers. But those folks are almost solo practitioners. They don't want full-time work. They leave a firm, and they're on more short-term engagements. Yep. And also for doc review folks, the people that don't want to work at a firm doesn't mean that they're not working at all. They may be just hidden from LinkedIn and elsewhere where you can source the information. But what I think the biggest issue with that firms have to deal with is, unlike large corporations where your salespeople can't just walk out the door with trade secrets, a pipeline of business, and go elsewhere. It's not like someone from Google is going to go to Oracle with other accounts attached. Law firm partners can do that because of the ethical rules for clients' right to choose. So if David Rose wanted to leave tomorrow, he could go to a different firm, bring his practice, and then all of a sudden what you have are fewer hours at Pryor Cashman that need to be serviced and more hours at the other firm that needs to be serviced. So with firm management, and I understand they need to lead by example, but it's very difficult because who is leadership? Leadership is an aggregation of every partner that has a significant enough book of business that is keeping the hours, which is the firm's profit model for associates to bill. It's a very, very difficult model to manage. And so when I look at these numbers and the data, I kind of I try to explain it from my perspective, which is probably a little bit skewed, but I don't think much has changed other than there was 6 months of firms trying to figure out how to service hours that were there, but they didn't figure out Zoom yet. One other thing that I am seeing in our business is that the hiring runway has shortened. So instead of taking maybe 6 months for a placement or whatever it is, and I look at this as lost profits too. So the longer it takes for a lateral hire, you're not billing hours, or you're pushing them on your more senior folks that are already inundated. So the longer it takes, the firms are less profitable. With Zoom now becoming an acceptable format to get all those meetings, even for a lateral partner to an associate, and you're shrinking the runway, this is a tremendous advantage for firms to get people in the seats to start billing. And it's actually been a boom for the lateral recruiting market as well. For us, if it would normally take 6 months and now it takes 3 months or 30 days, we're seeing a lot more volume of hires. Last thing I'll say, and I'll leave this and then I'll go back on mute. Unsolicitedly, firms are reaching out to us, and I look at this and I thought to myself, well, maybe this is going to be short-lived. They're paying us 50% commissions now.
Yeah, that's what we've heard from MLA also. It's crazy.
And that's what we're invoicing. So I see this. And in a way, I told one of my colleagues, Ataf Farhadi, who may be on this watching now, I said, this is going to be short-lived. It's going away. But, his point was, well, in January, it's going to get even worse. And things are kind of sticky. In certain areas, if you need an associate, 50% increase on a recruiter's fee to pay attention to your firm and it works, it's not all that much, because if you look at it, an associate bills 2,000 hours, say $500 an hour, $1 million, you pay the associate whatever the associate's making, lower overhead now because of you can work remotely and all that. The transaction fee for that first year for us, 50% more, really what's our appetite. But as long as you can have a break even on the associate, and I think firms look at this as a profit model, I just don't see that coming back so much. We'll normalize eventually. I think Ralph, Mr. Allen, I should say, noticed at some point when we normalize and you think it's not going to be such a hockey stick up, but the hockey stick up is just a response to a standstill of 6 months. And so if you kind of take away that 6 months and average it out over 3 years, we're not going to see that much difference.
It's pretty extraordinary though. I think in do any of you worry that the work will stop at this pace and then firms will be, sort of not at the right size, have too many salaries to pay? Or do you guys worry about firms just kind of growing too big?
Well, the salaries are paid by the business that's generated by the partners.
Right.
And, oftentimes, even if it's not tied to an eat what you kill model, your compensation is tied to your profitability.
Yeah.
And
so I would suggest, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rob.
I'll go back on mute here.
No, I was just going to say that I think, and I don't know how many firms are this way, but I think that many firms don't have a handle on the work, meaning the work that's being given first year, second year, third year on up. You might have a misplacement of, how assignments are being handed out. So if you have a second year or third year associate, are they doing the appropriate level of work? And I think a better understanding of that, and some firms call it practice management, some firms call it whatever, but firms that have a better handle on that, how they're staffing cases, how they're handing out assignments, those firms will have I think, a longer lead time to know when they need to go to market, right? They'll know where the weaknesses are in their associate ranks, even in their partner ranks, based on the work that's being done. And if the work is not up to par, if it's not where it needs to be, then someone will know we have some weaknesses at this level. We have some strengths here. There are people who are being promoted up and you've got to replace that, right? Or they're leaving or whatever. But you got to know, kind of what your players should be doing at the different levels. And many firms delegate that out to practice groups. They sometimes just delegate it to the partners who run their teams. They say, you staff your cases the way you want, but it's an overall firm issue that has major economic consequences. If you don't have an understanding and you just start losing people, Now you're paying Michael and his colleagues 50% just to find the bodies.
You know,
to
Ralph, I
bring
just
him
want to
in.
add one thing there. You know, mentorship's very important. It's also creating your competition. And this isn't for my business, it's just what I see. So at a firm where you have a senior mentor and you start doing good work, then you're put in front of the client, and then you start running your own deals, and then you're on the conference call with Goldman Sachs and the bankers see you. You know, at some point, for you to get the credit you deserve because you feel that this is now your client, even if it's on a matter basis, the only way you can get that credit is by going elsewhere, unless the firm's going to recognize you. And so they kind of work against each other in a way. So for partners who are really grooming people to come in to partner, and you're introducing your client relationships to them, in a way you're creating your future competition, unless you can institutionalize a client, unless you do all KKR's work, all TPG's work, or whoever it may be. But without that, you know, it's a very problematic place to be if your young lieutenants have that fire to, you know, keep on growing, and if they're motivated by compensation at all.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear what David Rose thinks about that.
Yeah, David Rose. And
So
tell us about the unique position that opportunity that mid-sized firms have, in your opinion.
Sure. I think Ralph really, I couldn't have said it better in terms of the way you need to assess it. Michael's points are well taken too, but I think one advantage that a mid-sized firm has is, you know people, and you know people really well. And there are personal connections that allow you to, in ways, transcend some of the problems that Michael identified as it relates to bringing up younger lawyers into partnership, putting them in front of the clients, because as your practice grows, you can't be at every meeting, you can't be at every deposition, or every hearing, trial, whatever it is. And so you need to develop people, but you also have to find a way to ensure that they are loyal to the firm, not just because there's loyalty that the firm expects, but that there's loyalty that flows both ways, and that there has to be an understanding that by engaging them on that level, it's not for purposes of them becoming your competition, but it's for purposes of them developing their own capabilities, their own professional independence, and their own practices one day, if that's what they aspire to. So again, it's about that intentionality. But to Stephanie, to your question, being in a mid-sized firm really does allow you to create the kinds of relationships that foster that. You know, I could sit here and talk about mid-sized nirvana all day long. I mean, I've obviously been here for 24 years and like this model and think it's fantastic and a wonderful way to practice law. Is it perfect? Of course not. But I think those are some of the advantages we have as it relates to, again, retaining people, what I call, you know, helping them find fulfillment and development in their practice and professional lives.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, listen, you guys can't compete on salary, but there's so many other things. And I would just encourage everybody to think about the life cycle of an associate, life cycle of a lawyer. It goes far beyond their tenure with you. So if you're not also investing in an alumni relations program, you need to, because your alumni have a lot of power over, they can become future clients, future referrals, they can pivot and boomerang back to you guys. They are people you want to stay in touch with. And so don't think of, you know, we know that not everybody wants to make partner. We know people are going to leave. So help them maintain a close relationship with your firm and give them the tools they need to succeed, to offer them CLEs, invite them back to the firm for different things. It doesn't matter if they left on bad terms, but I think that's a really smart way that any size firm can do this. I see a lot of small and mid-sized firms don't think about alumni relations programs, and they should. So David, get that alumni relations program up and running if you don't have it already. I want to ask each of you guys, I know we're running out of time and I'm so bummed out about that. Two questions for each of you. What do you think law firms are doing well? And what do you think law firms can do to retain their people right now? So Amber, let's start with you.
Sure.
You don't have to answer those. You can, you know, so what are law firms doing well with regard to, not in general, but like retention and recruiting, and what advice, you know, do you have going forward?
Yeah. So, okay. I know one of the questions kind of what are firms doing right or wrong when it comes to, you know, diversity. And I think it's quite the question. We could have an entire panel about this. I do think that we are seeing firms are being creative and innovative and care and want to recruit diverse attorneys. But, as we talked about earlier, when you look at that entry level recruiting, percentage, there's work that can be done as far as getting people into the door. So, I think just continuing to focus on pipelines and supporting people early in their career is so important. And I hope that firms will continue to just look outside of the normal box that we look at and continue to be innovative in the ways that we recruit people. And then lastly, I'll just note that when we do think about retention strategies and initiatives within our firms, it's great to implement those, but just as a reminder, there's not a one size fits all. So when it comes to what people need or want in order to be successful, relationships are so important to figure out what people feel that they need, so that we can deliver on that on a case-by-case basis. And I think that will really help to retain people.
Yeah, that's great advice, I think, for everybody. And also remember, listen to what your people want. If they want to go in the office, enable them to do that. If they want to work from home or move to California and you only have a New York office, enable them to do that. Give them the support they need. But I do think there's a happy medium between working from home. I think, Ralph, you kind of said this, and we talked about this. There needs to be opportunities to get to know people in the office. Associates, I think, are missing out on some of those mentoring relationships, and in general, getting to know their colleagues and the partners. Working from home, I think, has been great in a flexible way, but also is hurting some people, and there has to be a happy medium between the two. So working, getting to know people, not just on a Zoom, being in the office somewhat, but being also flexible. David Latt, same question for you. I'm going to ask all the panelists this.
Sure.
And we'll close out the day. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so in terms of what firms are doing well, I think that they are thinking beyond money. Look, they are thinking of money. Look at all the pay raises and bonuses, and they're being very strategic. It's almost like rolling bonuses or a kind of vesting. By the time you get to December, well, there's going to be those spring bonuses. And by the time you get to the spring, well, there's going to be the fall bonuses. So it's kind of like they keep pulling the carrot and the associates keep following it. But at a certain point, the money runs out or it's not enough. And firms are being smarter about that. They're coming up with other ways to be attractive to associates. You mentioned earlier, Stephanie, Kirkland shortening its partnership track. I think we also talked about Sidley announcing access to MBA programs so associates can invest in themselves, whether they stay at Sidley or not. Oric has a new initiative about unplugged time to give people time away from their devices and their computers so they don't burn out. So I think the thing firms are doing right is they're thinking beyond just the money. In terms of what I would say going forward, there's that famous saying about how a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think many firms are using this crisis and the whole remote or remote hybrid thing as a way to beef up their training. I did a piece for my Substack newsletter called something like 6 Tips for Training During the Pandemic. And I interviewed talent officers and professional development people at different firms. And they've used this as an opportunity to improve their training and orientation in ways they should have and could have done before the pandemic and never did. So I talked to people at MoFo and Goodwin about the so-called flipped classroom, where the training is much more interactive. It's not just a partner talking at people over, old sandwiches for an hour at lunch, but it's actually about having the associates do exercises that get them more engaged. So I would just say, don't let this crisis go to waste. You can actually use it to improve your training. And if you improve your training and invest in your people, they are more likely to stick around.
100%. I mean, the law firms have been forced to innovate, but let's not go back to the way things were. If I hear one more person say, we just want to go back to normal, there is no normal, guys. This is a new world. We've now, done things that were uncharted. This industry was forced to innovate. So we need to continue to build upon that. Laura Leopard, thoughts on the market, what firms are doing well, and advice?
I think everyone's favorite report, the growth decline report in Firmscape, sort of like the page 6 of Leopard Solutions. When you go and look at that report right now, there are firms at the bottom of that top 200 growth decline report that you would never expect to see there. These are the firms that have not adapted as well, is my guess, to what David just said. I talked to someone who left a top 200 firm 2 weeks ago, and they said, they just keep throwing money at the problem. Money isn't the problem. The problem is much deeper than that. It's about having a life. It's about a life, all of that. It's the firms that recognize that it is more about than just money are the firms that will do better with retention. Also, to Amber's point, the firms have to look outside of the normal schools they recruit from for entry-level hires. Knowing what their ROI on hires is by school is very important. I've seen firms where the managing partner went to X law school. They hire a lot of people from that law school. Their retention rate from people from that law school is terrible. It was great 10 years ago. It's not great now. They just don't know because they're not looking at the data. And that could help them figure out the best places for them to go, find candidates. This is a whole new world. Data can really help them make better decisions. There's different ways to look at a problem. And I think that's where you're going to see the winners in this upcoming year are the people who are thinking differently, behaving differently, and recognizing that the world has changed.
Yes. And remember, there's accountability now. It's not, people have, they're asking around about your firm. They're looking on Glassdoor, which take with a grain of salt, but firms really need to walk the walk and talk the talk about the things that they're doing and sustain them going forward. And again, think outside the box, different schools, different, look, I have a firm that's a New York-based firm that just hired an associate in Rochester and is letting her work remotely. Do that, accommodate people, be flexible. They do not need to be in the office every day. Ralph, your parting thoughts of advice?
I think what firms did right was that they showed that they could be flexible. I mean, look, all the things that we did in the last 24 months were things that people like me and my colleagues have been talking about for 15 years, but could never happen. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do this and do that. And all of a sudden on a dime, we did it. What we did in the last 24 months was an operations thing. We built a virtual platform outside of our buildings, and our lawyers got out there and they stayed connected with their clients and they found a way to work. I think going forward, if you were going to create a brand new law firm today, it wouldn't look anything like what any of our firms are today.
Nope.
And I think that we should remember that a little bit. And this is boiling down to be a war for talent, a war for legal talent, a war for business entity professional talent, meaning people who serve the law firm as a business entity, but serve the law firm also as legal support professionals. So this is going to be all about people. And so the more we can look at how to become more operationally effective and efficient, get rid of the things that we really don't need. We proved what we can live without. We prove what we can live without. And I think lastly, just turning into how it is. People say, oh, I can't connect with the associates because they're not in the office. Well, if they're at home, give them a call. If you all feel comfortable, go out to walk your dogs together. Or there's a way. If there, you can find a way, you can make a way. And I think what this last 24 months has taught us that we can do it. We just have to do it. We just have to.
That's great. David Rose, and then Michael Allen.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief and I think sum up what everyone else I think was hitting on, and that is intentionality. That's what has been the hallmark. Initially, I guess you can't call it intentionality because it was imposed upon us, as Ralph noted, when the pandemic first struck. But it's been great to see firms across the board at every tier really seek to maintain it for the most part. There are some people who resist it, but I think there is an intentional focus on the fact that things are different and how do we operate and exist in this environment and the one to come.
Sorry, that's great. That's Michael Allen, your final thoughts for us. I could talk about this, guys, for hours. I'm sad we're out of time.
I think what firms have done well is adapt their model fairly nimbly and welcoming new talent models. And so allowing folks to work remotely, hiring secundees, hourly workers, Kirkland, and among others, opening in Salt Lake City, good talent there. mostly for the associate talent for staffing, so they don't have the same issue in the lateral side. I think what firms are doing poorly are kind of two things. One, taking the easiest way out, throwing money at problems.
Yeah.
Retention bonuses. Laura, you mentioned we're going to see a lot of folks bounce after in January. I haven't seen that so much, even though the assumptions all make sense. It's kind of depends on the each year. But firms right now for hiring, they'll make an associate whole just to bring the associate over. Some firms are throwing money for signing bonuses, 6-figure signing bonuses to get talent. So I think throwing money at problems is what's going to happen is you're going to keep on throwing more and more money. And I do agree with David and Ralph that mentorship and actually having that loyalty and relationship is more meaningful. One other thing I think firms could do better is, from my perspective, we'll take meetings with firms and they'll give us their wish list and say, we want X, Y, and Z, a partner with this so much business and whatever it is. And I look at them and say, well, you and 200 other firms. I think what firms could do better is establish stronger and fewer relationships with search firms and actually have a buy-in back and forth to get the attention, and not just saying, to use Lateral Link, but whoever your trusted recruiter is. Otherwise, you're just throwing information out there, and there's so much information. The search firms aren't going to respond and say, yes, I'm going to go spend my time on this, because if you can look at it, we're contingency based. So I think really building the relationship, if you want to use recruiters on a personal level, would go a long way.
Yeah, that's great. So I think, listen, I think to David Rose's point, intentionality is such an important thing. Pivoting, I feel like that's like the new synergy word that's been overused, but we need to continue to advance, the idea of like, we've always done things this way, so let's keep doing them. Or if it's not broke, let's not fix it. It is broke. And so I'll take the forced innovation because we have come a long way. So we have to just continue and see what 2022 offers, but we're not going back to the way things were. And that's a good thing. So remember that. So we will have another program on January 12th, which is going to go very much more in depth on Laura's data and more data on the state of the industry report, which we do every year. So join us for that. I put a link to that. We will send everybody the slides and we'll send everyone a recording to this if you missed it. I want to thank the panelists for your very interesting and awesome insights. I think we all came at it from different vantage points, and it's so important. Let's see what 2022 brings, right? So happy holidays to everybody. And thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.